everybody, welcome back to my channel. Hope we're all having a fab day and a wonderful start to September. I can't believe it is September and it's autumn and it's like a perfect rainy day today as well. So it's like the perfect start to autumn. I'm very excited for autumn. Once summer's kind of over, I'm like, give me all the autumn stuff. I'm going to talk through the books that I read in July and August because I realised I was a bit too late to film my July one because it was towards the end of the month. No, August. My July one in August, there we go. So I thought I'd just combine the 2 months together, make life a bit easy for myself. So I've not got all the books with me today, but obviously I always put a little clip or a picture on the screen just because I've lent books to people or books are elsewhere and I can't find them. So I'm just going to quickly count through what I read. So I DNF'd one book. I read 9 physical books through July and August, and then I also listened to 2 audiobooks. Yes. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll basically just go in the order I read them. So we'll be starting in July. Cast your mind back to the middle of summer. So the first book was the book that I DNF'd, which was a bit of a shame. Not a great way to start July. But I was reading Estella's Revenge by Barbara Havelock, and I just could not get into this. I found that I didn't care for the characters, and I find that something really important. And I found that kind of strange because, I mean, I've never read Great Expectations, so I don't know whether it might be because of that. But I also know some people who have read it and they felt the same way and they also DNF'd it. I think the problem I had with this book, was the fact that I just didn't care for some of these characters, especially our main characters. And there's some like not very nice things that happen to them, and I wasn't kind of rooting for them or wanting them to get out of that situation. And because of that, I ended up losing interest. So I don't know if I'll go back to this book at some point. It's interesting because some of the people I was also reading this with felt the same way. One person gave it a 4 stars, I think, and carried on, but the other person who I was reading it with DNF'd it. So I don't know, maybe at some point I'll go back to it. Okay, so the next book I read, so I just to give some context because some of the July books all have a similar theme. I took part in the summer camp readathon that Celine over at the Book Wanderers was doing, which was so much fun. It was basically like Summerween, but there were all these different prompts and I just had the best time. It was the first time I'd really done something like that. I have spoken about this in a previous video, but I don't really like straight up horror. I like, it's more psychological thrillers, anything kind of gothic, that's kind of my vibe, or cozy, spooky, if that makes sense. So the first book that I read was The Burial Plot by Elizabeth McNeil. Now I've never read The Doll Factory and that does get some mixed reviews, but I have since bought that because I really enjoyed this. It's a historical fiction about a girl who, something happens and she's involved with 2 men. They're kind of like bit kind of ruffians type of thing in London, and they end up securing her a place at a country house as a maid, and she kind of starts to be involved with this family that she's working for. And the idea is that they're trying to con the family, but then she kind of starts to turn and become more independent, and then things start to happen with these 2 other men coming into the house. It's all kind of sneaky and it really builds the tension. That's what I really liked about this. And she's an unlikable character who I ended up loving and really rooting for by the end of this. Now it did take me a while to get into this. I'm just was just getting used to the style maybe. I did find it a little bit slow at the start, but once I was in, I was hooked and I just flew through the rest of this book. I did find a couple of things a bit too convenient, like how the other characters kind of secured their places in the house. But maybe that was just, I don't know, maybe I just felt those bits were a bit rushed. I think the pacing was just a little bit off with this. I think that was the only thing, come to think of it, that was the reason why I struggled to get into it, and then those things didn't quite work out for me. Everything was kind of established and the flow really kicked in from halfway through. I was there. I was so there. Some of these twists were so good as well. I really enjoyed the twists. And I gave this a 4 stars, I believe. I'm gonna give it 4.5, so it was pretty good. As I said, it was just the pacing, but this might be just the author's writing style. The next thing that I read was an audiobook, and it was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Such a classic, one that I don't think I read as a child. I'm gonna say I didn't, but I knew the story. I'd like seen the films, and just through generally like being told the story, I guess, and maybe it was read to me, I'm not sure. It was interesting coming back to this as an adult and maybe consuming this in the full written form, because I know sometimes obviously there could be like abridged versions. I did really love the character's growth in it. I think that's definitely one of the strong points, and I love the themes of nature in it. I just fell in love with the imagery and the scenery, and also the love of nature, which is kind of cultivated in this book, from characters who naturally love nature to our main character who has really come from a place where there is not much nature at all, or a very different type of nature, as she's brought up in India. The interesting thing was that I found that aside from a few side characters, I found that our main characters were unlovable, which I do like, but almost just a little bit too much. I wasn't quite rooting for them as much as, say, in other books when I get an unlikable character and then their arc just makes them so lovable. But I just found with this it didn't quite hit that for me, and I think that kind of stilted the book when I was listening to it. I just was like, I don't care what you're moaning about. You know, like there was things going on and I was just like, oh, you know, I didn't quite connect with those characters. The next book that I read was The Vile Village, which is the 7th book in the Series of Unfortunate Events series. These are definitely getting stronger now. As I said in June's wrap up, these are some of the books now that I haven't read, and I am really enjoying them still. The orphans are currently in a vile village. I mean, that's pretty obvious from the title, and they're thinking that they're getting close to a set of initials, which is what they've discovered in the previous books, which they're hoping is going to lead to some clues about what's happened to them and why things are happening to them. There's lots of twists. I did get a bit frustrated because there's some really obvious things in there that I think even my child self would have been able to tell. It's so tricky when you're reading things as an adult now, and how you would have read them as a child, but I do feel like some of these things were glaringly obvious. I don't know. It was fun though. I think I gave this a 4 stars, so it was still pretty solid. Yeah, I gave this a 4 stars, so it's still a fun ride. And I'm carrying on with the series. I'm making my way through. I'm a bit stuck on the 8th book at the moment, but I'm hoping I'm gonna get through that in September. Next, we have the first book in the Truly Devious series. This is by Maureen Johnson, and I loved this. This was a 4-star read, so pretty good. I felt like this book got better as it went along. The thing that I struggled with was connecting to Stevie. I never felt like I quite got her, and I found her a little bit bland for my liking, which is funny because she's supposed to be this quirky girl who's so into murder mystery and true crime and wants to be a detective. When she's older, she gets sent, well, she doesn't get sent, she applies to this special school where it's completely free to go, and it's a bit like a Hogwarts type of thing, or like the school in Wednesday where it's very different in the teaching styles. A lot of the things that are taught, like the curriculum is based around you have your own curriculum. But what happens is there is a murder that has happened quite a while ago, and a missing persons case as well, and Stevie's kind of going and she wants to solve this, but while she's there another murder also happens, so we're not sure what's happening with this so-called Truly Devious who is supposedly the murderer. Yeah, I think the main focus of this book is the plot. I think this is that's the strong point, is the plot. I really enjoyed it. The ending was a bit, I didn't really know how to feel about it, but I do want to continue with the series. I'm realising as well, because we're kind of getting into autumn and towards Halloween and all the fun times of that, some of these books might be quite good recommendations for you. So obviously this is like dark academia, I would say. The burial plot is more gothic. And then we've got some good other options coming up for different vibes for spooky season. So speaking of a different vibe for autumn reading, I read my first graphic novel, and it was Pumpkinhead by Rainbow Rowell, and the graphics were done by Faith Erin Hicks. Oh, I loved this book so much. It's the perfect cozy autumn vibe. Obviously it's set on a pumpkin patch. We've got two characters. We've got Josiah and Deja. I really hope I said that right. And they work on a pumpkin patch, and it's their last shift before they go off to college. They're friends, and there is a bit of a love story going on, a bit of a love triangle situation. But this is just like the perfect autumny setting, like being set in a pumpkin patch. I just absolutely loved it. It was just such vibes. I did find at one point it was a little bit slow. I think just the pacing, but it was more of a fun vibe. So I gave this a 4.5 stars. I absolutely am going to keep this and absolutely going to read it again, because I just feel like it just makes my autumnal heart so happy. The next book I read was completely unplanned to be reading it during the summer camp, and I really enjoyed this. It's more of a non-fiction option if you're looking for something to read in autumn for spooky vibes, or kind of psychological vibes. And it was Sociopath by Patrick Gagney. This is a memoir about a woman discovering she is a sociopath, and also kind of her work in the field of psychology and specifically sociopathy. This was fascinating. I gave this a 5 stars. I love the fact that it was obviously read by Patrick. I found that's how, as I said before, that's how I'm consuming my non-fiction now, pretty much, is through audiobooks, especially if it's read by the person. And I just found this fascinating. Like, I found that the humour, a lot of dark humour, was great. It was just fascinating as well, kind of seeing her realising there's something not quite right with her, and also her creating her own coping mechanisms. I just really like the tone of this as well. It's witty, it's sarcastic, it's very much my kind of vibe. Okay, the next book that I read was more of like a sci-fi, psychological, I can't even describe it. It's Stuart Turton. I think that it's pretty hard to describe his writing style. So he actually describes his genre as genre bending. So that's the thing, he kind of includes all these different things in his books. So let me talk about the premise of this first, and then I will explain my feelings about it, because I loved his first 2 books. Loved. Especially the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. That book blew my mind. I thought it was fantastic. This book, on the other hand, didn't quite so much. So this is set, the premise is fantastic, by the way. So it's set on an island. Essentially, there's this fog which has taken over the world, almost like post-apocalyptic. But this island, this has a barrier around it because of a science lab which is there. So they've been able to survive, and we meet all these characters that are living on this island. There is a threat of the fog, obviously, but then a murder happens, so hence the title, The Last Murder at the End of the World. Also, can we just appreciate the end pages? I just think a fantastic job done by Waterstones on that. So you obviously have this murder mystery element, which is in all of his other books. There are some great Easter eggs in here. If you have read the 2 previous books, I thought they were so well done and so subtly done as well. It didn't quite add up. With the other 2 books, when we got through and I was guessing and I was like, oh, maybe it's this or maybe it's this. I think the problem is that this is, the narrator is an AI. I'm trying to describe it without giving away too much. An AI which is kind of implanted into everyone's brain so they can hear this AI, and it's essentially told from their perspective. They are unreliable. All the other characters are unreliable because when the murder happens, their memories are wiped. So no one has any idea, apart from this AI. They've got their own like orders going on. I think that was it. I never quite was able to put my finger on what was happening. There were some things that just didn't add up. I felt like it was trying to be too clever. And I don't overly reach for science fiction books because I do find a lot of the jargon takes me out of the story. But sometimes if science fiction is not necessarily too sciencey, I really enjoy it. And I was hoping that this was going to be like that, and it wasn't. Yeah, I just didn't. I was disappointed, and I don't think that's his fault. I think it's because of the. I feel like I really need to read this again, maybe. I don't know. I'm just so conflicted. I gave it a 3.75 stars because it was a really interesting ending. To be honest, if you have the Waterstones exclusive edition, there is a mini story at the back, and I personally enjoyed it more than the actual story and would have loved to have seen like a full-flown version of that. I'm not saying this is a bad book. I'm saying this book was probably too clever for me. It is interesting because I am seeing reviews now which are similar thoughts to me, so I don't feel so alone. And I think because I'm a fan of his previous work, I'm hanging on. I'm hanging on to the fact that I really like his work, and I think he's such a clever author whose ideas and the journey of the story is so intricate, and there's so many clues. I feel like I missed clues. I think that's the problem. So I think I will reread this at some point. Not yet. I need to kind of get over it first, and then I will come back to it. But I do want to reread this. I'm not saying it's a bad book, so that's probably not been very helpful at all in saying what I think about this book, but there you go, I tried. So those were all of my reads for July. Now let's move on to my August reads. So I didn't read as much in August. I just find that I always think I'm going to, and then I don't. So I read 4 books. The first one was The Push by Ashley Audrain. Loved this. Fantastic, devastating, complex, tense thriller, psychological, about a woman who becomes a mother and then is realizing something is wrong with her child. There's some events that happen in this book and the fallout of it. Just found it so interesting. It was so fast paced and I just ate it up. I just thought it was so interesting. I think what was really interesting as well is because I'm kind of getting to an age where motherhood or potential motherhood isn't far off, it was slightly apprehensive because obviously there's this whole thing that this mother does not connect to her child, and that kind of freaked me out a little bit because I was like, what if that happens to me if I have children? There is a lot of complex psychology in this, and this is my vibe. I really love this kind of mind play. I like the fact that there was a lot of kind of past trauma kind of linked into it, the age-old thing of like a hysterical woman and how people still want to kind of put that onto people. And I loved how everything like unfolded on the page. Our main character is flawed, but I was rooting for her so much. So yeah, that was an easy 5-star read, definitely, especially after coming off of the Stuart Turton book, which was a bit of a letdown. Okay, the next book that I read was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. Now, this was a book that I actually had taken a break from. I'd started reading it in June and I stopped for summer camp and then came back to it in August, which was probably for the best anyway. So this book is beautiful. It's stunning. It's beautifully written. It's almost slightly poetic in the form. I knew as soon as I read the first sentence, I was like, this is going to be a book. Like this book is doing things. However, this book is so heavy. For a book that is, I believe, just 200 pages or just over 200 pages, it's really heavy. It deals with some really serious topics. And I did struggle with that. I found it a struggle to not have any lightness in it. I just felt like I was being beaten up the whole way through. There is also a fair bit of animal violence and gore, which is a bit of a turn off for me. I don't really like that. And I don't know how much it actually added to the story. I'm not really sure. I think it was good to kind of set the scene for a lot of the things that end up going on. But yeah, I did feel like that's my fault. I probably should have looked at any trigger warnings before going into this. In the second half, I found that the flow just got too choppy, and I think that's because it became too poetic. So I think it started off being more of like a prose style, and then as we got into the second half, that's when the poeticness really came into effect. And I did find that that did interrupt the pace, and this was after I had started reading again, but I wasn't going straight into the poetic. I did have that kind of transition between the two, so I don't think it's because I stopped reading. I do think there is a bit of a jump anyway. So I gave this a 3.5 stars, but I feel like that's just my personal preference. I'm not saying again that this is a bad book or an okay book. I just feel like for me it was a bit too much. I'm really glad I read it though, because it's one of those books that I've been wanting to read for so long. Okay, and then we ended the month on 2 fabulous books. So there is a similar theme. It's one of my favourite themes as well. Historical fiction, but especially anything kind of set in kind of like Greek mythology retellings, or kind of like Rome, anything kind of that kind of side of things. So I next read The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. I love this so much. This is about a group of women who are sex workers in Pompeii. They work at the Wolf Den, which is a brothel, and it's about their lives and what happens to them. And the main focus especially is Amara, who is trying to fight to save up to be free. She wasn't born into slavery. She was essentially sold by her mother, and then kind of things get worse and worse from there for her. I loved the female friendships in it. This core group of women who are so different and so flawed, but all just trying to stick together and support each other. I found this was really easy to read, but I felt like this painted a beautiful picture of Pompeii, and also such a descriptive image of their lives as well. Also the ending really had me. I think that was it, and I was like, I need to read the second book straight away. I'm gonna pace myself, because this is a trilogy, so I've already got the second book, but I'm going to wait because I feel like I could consume this series literally so quickly. The interesting thing was, compared to the writing style and the description, I'm not saying this is like very kind of long description, I just really enjoyed the style of the description, but I found the speech a little bit too simple compared to it, and it just grated ever so slightly. I knocked off half a star because of that, because I didn't just completely immerse myself in it. I just felt I wasn't quite there, and I love a book where I can literally just be so immersed in it that I don't know what's happening around me, that type of thing. But still a great book, absolutely loved it, can't wait to read the second book. And then lastly, oh my gosh, this book broke me. I finally read The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, one of my favourite things, Greek mythology retellings. I know this story. Didn't mean it didn't break me any less. This is about Patroclus, I did say it right. Patroclus and Achilles, how they end up meeting, how they end up falling in love. Could this be the greatest love story that nobody talks about? Maybe. I just adored it. I really enjoyed Circe, but I feel like this is the book. Like, this is her book. I knew it as soon as I started reading it. I was like, this is beautiful. I loved the prose. I loved this kind of slow build to their relationship. I even found the warfare quite interesting, and that's normally not my jam, especially kind of in the third of the book, the last third of the book. Yeah, I just found this stunning. I read the last bit on the train, and I don't know how I held it together, because this ending still ripped me apart. It is absolutely beautiful. The interesting thing is, as well, is that Madeline Miller doesn't treat her readers as stupid and gives them all the information. There were some things that happened in this which I was really intrigued by, like kind of certain elements to it. I can't describe it without spoiling it. But I found that I was able to come to my own conclusions, and I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed not being kind of handheld through and guided and pushed through the story. I was able to come to my own conclusions, and I really respected that, because I feel like some books try and give you everything. Some books don't give you enough. This book was the perfect middle, and I really appreciated that. So there we go, those are all the books that I read over the last couple of months. Really hope you enjoyed this video. As always, let me know if you've read any of these books, whether you have got any exciting books coming up for September. I have shared my September TBR over on my TikTok, so if you're not following me on there, I am Georgie's Book Nook. Thank you so much for watching. Do subscribe if you want more book content like this, and I will see you in my next video. Mwah. Bye!